Welcome. We've got a great group here tonight. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Linda Schneider, President of the Sangamo County Historical Society, and we welcome you to our monthly program. We're very excited to have as our guest speaker tonight, Curtis Mann, who probably does not need an introduction, but I'm still going to read it. Curtis Mann has worked as a librarian, archivist, and historian in Springfield for over 30 years. He has co-authored numerous pictorial histories about the history of Springfield. Mann formerly worked as a research librarian at the Illinois Legislative Research Unit and was a partner in the research firm Sangamo Researchers, where he prepared nomination forms for the National Register of Historic Places, as well as local landmark forms for the city of Springfield. He retired in 2023 as the City of Springfield's historian, as well as the manager of the Sangamon Valley Collection at Lincoln Library in Springfield. Mann has served on the boards of the Sangamon County Historical Society, the Illinois Foundation for Frontier Studies, the Elijah Iles House Foundation, and the Springfield Historic Preservation Association. Mann also serves as the Secretary and Treasurer of the Illinois Foundation for Colonial and American Studies. Mann received his BA in History from Southern Illinois University and his MS in Information Services Sciences from the University of Illinois. Thank you very much, Curtis, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction. I didn't know I wrote it so well. That's good. You'd still like to hear about yourself, don't you? So who's heard of Sangamo Town before? Yeah, pretty much everyone has. And probably the one thing you probably remember the most is because of its connection with Abraham Lincoln. I mean, Lincoln was connected with the town because he was hired to build a flatboat on the river in the spring of 1831. He worked for Denton Offutt, who hired him and his cousins to build the flatboat, and for a trading voyage to New Orleans. He was assisted in constructing the boat. He insisted in constructing the boat and loading it with pork. Stories of his stay there are among the earliest of his time in the county. However, the town has its own rich but brief history, which we will explore this evening. That's my signal. The founder of Sangamo Town, Moses Broadwell, hailed from New Jersey. He fought in the American Revolution and later moved his family to Cincinnati, Ohio, and then in 1819 to St. Louis. That was just a stopover because the family was probably in the Sangamo country by the spring of 1880. And you can see that's just a marker showing where he's buried out at Oak Ridge Cemetery. And then this map, you can see where Sangamo Town is north and west of Springfield on the Sangamon River, where it turns to go north. And so that kind of puts you at about 6 to 7 miles from Springfield. This is a plat of Sangamo Town on the right. Moses Broadwell had to be the most ambitious of settlers in Sangamon County. He had a plan that had a clear commercial emphasis that strove to use the area's transportation network, the river, to join Sangamon County with the cities and markets downstream. His plan included, like Elijah Iles, Broadwell comes in here with money. And so what do you do for 2 years while you're waiting, 3 years while you're waiting for this land to be opened up that you could buy it? So you sit there and Iles opens a store and Broadwell actually creates a community. He placed an advertisement in the paper describing the town of Sangamo. One version appeared in the February 10th issue, 1824 of the Edwardsville Spectator. In it, he noted that he was working on getting a merchant mill, sawmill, and 2 carding machines in operation. 1/4 of the proceeds from the sale of lots was to go towards the construction of a bridge across the river, which would have been the first one of its type across the river. The bridge was never built, partly because of faulty lumber provided by a sawmill. Another planned structure was the construction of a courthouse, which Broadwell promised funding for if the town was selected as a permanent county seat. The The same ad appeared in December of 1823 in a Cincinnati newspaper. A note appeared at the bottom of the ad directing questions to Jacob C. Roll, who was noted to have explored the country. Broadwell also announced that a public sale of lots would take place on the first Monday of June 1824. At the sale, 48 lots were purchased by 22 individuals who made promissory notes to pay Broadwell the full value of their purchase at a later date. And one of those promissory notes said they would be paid in fruit trees. And so Roll became very, very pivotal in the history of Sangamo Town, but also a lot of the acquaintances from this area, from the Cincinnati area, would come and settle. I mean, it was just like a whole pot of them, and the Clarks, the Dunns, the Shepherds, the Wagoners, they were all intermarried either here or before they came here. And so there's just kind of a wave of them that came to Sangamon County because of probably this advertisement and or their connections with the Broadwells, who had lived in Cincinnati as well. The designation of the Springfield community in 1821 as a site of the county government was a temporary one. In March of 1825, the state legislature appointed 4 commissioners to select a permanent site for the county seat. Springfield, Sangamo Town, and Centerville, which plat is shown here, were the 3 contenders for the selection. This town was laid out by John Taylor and was located north of Springfield on the north side of the river, near where the Fort Clark or Peoria Road would cross at a place called Stevenson's Ferry. Now, the competition is between these 3. You got 2 of them located on the river, and you have Springfield down where it's at. And basically, they're going to have these commissioners come into town who did not know anything about the area. So, basically, Springfield stole this whole county seat thing through deception and bribery. And part of it is, you know, if the story is believed, as the victors always can tell the story, Andy Elliott was a tavern owner here in town, and he was connected with the Kellys, which were the original settlers in the Springfield area. And he offered to guide these guys, these 4 commissioners, to these 2 other sites. Well, the road to Peoria, or to Sangamo Town, was quite well established. Even if it was a trail, there was a way to get there. Well, he took them through the backwater. This is March, so probably he took them through sloughs and any kind of way, and it made it look like it was almost impassable to get there. And so when they got to Sangamo Town, they liked the site, they thought it was great. And then they said, well, can you take us back a different way? So he did, but he made it even worse and took them back through more standing water. So when they got back to Springfield, and I don't know if he did the same thing trying to get them to Centerville or not, but when he got back to Springfield, they were pretty much like, that place is remote and inaccessible. That's how the story goes. And also, Elijah Isles had his wife prepare a great meal for them, and so they sat down to a nice meal. And he was a store owner. And how you got paid back then was called scrip, and it was called state scrip. And it wasn't worth about half of probably what the face value was, because it just lost value as soon as it was printed. You know, it was just printed paper. And so Isles said, well, I'll let you buy whatever you want in the store at full value. So, well, you know, give me the scrip, and if it's worth $1, you get $1 worth of goods instead of, you know, me telling you it's only worth 50 cents. So between those 2 deceptions, they selected Springfield as the site. So that left Broadwell kind of high and dry in a sense. He wrote a letter to the 3 men, Boyd, Dixon, and Stillman, noting that the agreement had never been reached for them to purchase the town. I mean, they were supposed to help pay for the surveying, advertising, and the bridge timber, but they saw the writing on the wall and backed out, investing their capital in Springfield. In the fall of 26, Broadwell sold a large portion of the property that Sangamo sat on to his son-in-law, William Carson, who in turn sold it to his brother-in-law, Charles Broadwell, in 1827, and Moses Broadwell died in 1827. So Charles Broadwell basically became the proprietor of the town short of any of the lots that Moses Broadwell had sold himself. And what Broadwell had done in the meantime was go ahead and get services into the town. So he got a store established, he had a doctor at the town, he had a tavern, a licensed tavern owner come in. So he had some services, and he'd already had the carting machine and the mill going as well. So the first of the services was a store, and it was owned by a man named Ebenezer Brigham. He was the town's first merchant. He was born in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts. As a young man, he traveled west to Shawneetown and then walked across Illinois until arriving in St. Louis in 1818. He might have been this person called E. Brigham, who was hired in 1820 to teach at a newly formed Belleville Academy in Belleville, Illinois. I don't know that for sure, but that's a pretty unique name. He left in 1822 to prospect lead deposits in the area around Galena. He came south and settled in Sangamon County at Sangamo Town by the fall of 1822 and was operating a store by February of 1823. He purchased lots 1, 2, and 3 from Broadwell for $100. A post office was established by June 1824, where he was appointed the first postmaster, and he also partnered with Charles Broadwell in a wool carting operation in 1826. And this is kind of a funny thing I did, because that's a picture of him on the left, back after he got much older. And this is something that Lyndon Garber and I had always discussed back when we were working at the Sangamon Valley. A lot of these early settlers, you'd never get to see them as young men, because he would have been a young man when he was here, and you always see him as much distinguished older gentleman, and so you don't get the sense of what they look like. Well, using an AI age generator, I told it to make the photograph make him look younger. So that's that's what AI can do for you, But anyway, and I don't know if that's how he looked like, but that's a representation of him. But Brigham's time in town was short. He apparently had lead fever after being up there already in 1822. He took an ad out in the Sangamon Spectator newspaper announcing his intention to leave Sangamo Town for the lead mines in Galena. He even noted he was sailing on a keel boat named Good Luck. A month later, the newspaper noted that he had sold his business in the town, and Brigham sold his lots to another merchant named Nathan Cromwell in 1827. The next service was a doctor named Addison Filio. He purchased lot number 4 on what was described as Main Street from Moses Broadwell in 1825. He was from New York and had been married in Lebanon, Illinois in 1823. He attended Fairfield Medical College. He was forced to leave school after he and 2 other students were suspected of grave snatching for scientific study. Supposedly, the local populace threatened to tear down the school if the 3 were not giving up. Filio's interest in studying dead bodies followed him to the Sangamon country. He is best remembered for his role in attempting to bring the corpse of Nathaniel Van Noy back to life after Van Noy was hung for murdering his wife in 1826. The attempt, which involved sending an electric current through the dead body, failed, and Filio and others dissected Van Noy's corpse. And it's written by an eyewitness who later, as an older man, wrote this reminiscence about, they had this cabin and they put the body in there, and basically anybody could sit there and watch them, do their operations or their investigations. Well, that's fuzzy. The town's first tavern was operated by Jacob Carman, another transplant from Ohio who'd received a license to operate a tavern in April of 1824. He operated a tavern from the town from lots 11 and 12. Carman maintained a tavern at this location until the fall of 1831 when he sold the lots to Azahel Stone. The tavern is best remembered for its connection with Abraham Lincoln during his brief stay at Sangamo Town. And this is just, I can't hardly see it, but the 1 and 12, 1 is where the store is, 12 is where the tavern is, and number 4, which looks like it should be blue, is where where the doctor's office was. The departure of the keelboat Good Luck in 1827 was the first documented river-related activity to Sangamo Town. There had to have been a lot more. I mean, that was one of the things that Broadwell mentioned in his ad for the newspaper, was that keelboats could probably make it up and down the river, you know, when for most of the season. The inappropriately named keelboat, which was owned by William Hamilton, struck a snag while descending to Sangamon on its trip down the river. One of her bottom planks broke loose while the crew attempted to get the boat off the snag. Water came in and caused the boat to turn on its side. 17 passengers attempted to reach the shore. Unfortunately, 3 men drowned, and more would have been expected, except for the efforts of the crew. Addison Filio, the doctor, who had decided that he was going to go to Galena along with Brigham, narrowly escaped drowning himself, and was actually given credit for his efforts in saving others. The boat was raised, repaired, and eventually made its way to Galena. This was an ill omen for the future of boat activity related to the town. The second store owner in Sangamo Town and successor to Ebenezer Brigham was a man named Nathan Cromwell, who purchased the store building and lots from Brigham in 27. He was also appointed postmaster. Cromwell, like many of the others, was from New York and settled in Springfield as early as 1825 when he operated a store on Jefferson Street in Springfield. Cromwell became the owner of one of Tom Cox's slaves, named Nancy or Nance, in July of 27. Cox had borrowed money from Cromwell and was unable to pay him back. Cromwell took Nance to live in Sangamo Town. He also received a license to keep a public house or tavern at his store in Garden Prairie in Sangamo County, which is interesting because Sangamo Town is down here at the bottom, and Garden Prairie was actually between Salisbury and New Salem. And I tried to make it think that, you know, they meant that he had a tavern license for a store at Sangamon, but Garden Prairie specifically is located between New Salem and Salisbury. So he may have had one of the first stores in that area because both those towns did not exist at the time. He lasted less than 2 years before leaving for Pekin and taking Nance with him in 1829. He would later sell her to another resident of Pekin before dying. Nance would later be set free with the assistance of Abraham Lincoln as her lawyer. As I noted before, the departure of the keelboat Good Luck was just the first instance of riverboat traffic connected to Sangamo Town known to us. The second instance was the flatboat named Sangamo 1, which is supposed to leave Sangamo Town between March 10th through the 16th, 1828 for St. Louis. The boat was either owned or contracted by the firm of Gatton and Enos to send a load of 107 barrels of what is described as army pork, or in my mind, inferior pork, 30 barrels of prime pork, and 50 kegs of lard. This activity falls into what the Sangamo Exporting Company was created for, but not probably related to it. This load of pork products made its way to St. Louis, and a second trip was made on the appropriately named flatboat Sangamo 2. Very original, people. The firm also sent 20 barrels of Broadwell superfine flour on a keelboat down to St. Louis. I got excited thinking about this flour might have been milled at the Sangamo Town. Unfortunately, I learned this flour was milled by Moses Broadwell's son John at a mill on Richland Creek, which was nearby. Alas, a third flatboat named Sangamo 3 was not meant to be, as the firm of Gatton and Enos ended in 1829. Besides keelboats and flatboats, steamboat transportation was attempted on a couple occasions to bring goods up the Sangamon River as far as the Portland Landing northeast of Springfield. As one of the points between Beardstown and Portland Landing, Sangamo Town stood to benefit from this development. The steamboat Talisman left Cincinnati on February 2nd, 1832. It had already been in service, as I found an ad in the St. Louis newspaper prior, noting that the firm had received 29 barrels of whiskey delivered by the Talisman. The boat arrived in Springfield at Portland Landing on March 24th, 1832, to much celebration which lasted briefly because a falling water level on the Sangamon forced the boat to depart early and steam backwards for much of its downstream trip. The newspaper noted that the captain of the Talisman was approached by farmers asking for seed. He agreed to bring more seed if 10,000 bushels had been subscribed. One of the subscription sites was Henry and Porter's Mill at Sangamo Town. The need for seed was apparently great because the previous winter was the famous winter of the deep snow. The weather remained so cold the following spring, corn could not be grown in the 1831 season, leaving no seed available for the 1832 planting. So it was very important commodity at the time for them to be bringing this up, from other things. Denton Offutt was bringing seed corn up as well to New Salem and advertising it for sale. It's unlikely that the Talisman ever returned. A May 3rd, 1832 St. Louis newspaper noted the boat was destroyed in a fire, basically while it was at the dock in St. Louis. Apparently it was not completely destroyed though, as 2 months later the St. Louis harbor master held a sale for the whole of the Talisman and its contents. So another ill-famed trip, blow related to Sangamo Town. The second steamboat to reach Sangamo Town was called the Utility. An 1834 newspaper announced that John Taylor had purchased the boat with the intention of running it up and down the Sangamon as water levels would allow. A postscript note stated that Utility had arrived at Sangamo Town where she was loading cargo. Taylor apparently sold his house in Springfield to the boat owners for $1,000 in order to buy the boat. Interestingly enough, another notice appeared just a couple weeks later announcing that the boat had arrived downstream at New Salem but could not be brought up because of the mill dam there, meaning that it apparently made one trip back down the river and tried to come back up 2 weeks later and could not because of the mill dam being too high. The Utility seems to have been somewhat cursed from the start. A January 12, 1833 article notes that Utility was a new, staunch, and light-drafted steamboat intended to run from St. Louis to different ports on the Illinois River. An August 3, 1833 article noted that the boat had run into another steamboat near Peoria and sunk. However, the owners were able to raise it and take it to St. Louis. 3 months later, while laying at the wharf, the boat's boiler exploded, badly scalding several people and leaving 3 dead. A Menard County history tells the fate of the Utility. It states that the Utility came back up the river as far as Petersburg in 1836, where the captain was afraid to start back downriver. It says the boat had been sold to John Taylor, which I think it already was owned by him, who happened to be one of the proprietors of Petersburg. He dismantled the boat and used the material to build the first frame house in Petersburg, and the steam engine was used to make the first steam mill in town. So that pretty much ended any kind of river traffic for the Sangamon River and/or to Sangamo Town. An early interesting Sangamo Town resident, as I mentioned, was Jacob C. Rawle. And just what I found in him, he had quite a career before coming to Sangamo Town. In 1810, he was operating a tinware factory in Springfield, New Jersey, before selling that business and leaving for Cincinnati, Ohio in 1813. Upon arriving there, he became the manufacturer of chairs. Rawle sold this business in 1822, and as noted before, he came west for a period to investigate the Sangamo country. In the summer of 1825, Rawle and his family left Cincinnati in a keelboat loaded with their possessions and goods for a store at Sangamo Town. The boat sank on their way here, and some of the goods were salvaged. This information comes from the Bible of our early history, the early settlers of Sangamon County. Rawle became a partner of Brigham's. It is not known if he remained a partner with Nathan Cromwell after Brigham's departure. He was a man of means, purchasing 400 acres of land from the federal government in the years 1825 to 26. Rawle definitely purchased the store and the lots from Cromwell on March 10, 1829, and became the new postmaster. That just seemed to be the thing. You're the store master, now you become the postmaster, the store owner. Roll apparently got into the tavern business as well. On March 8, 1831, he renewed a tavern license with the Sangamo County Commissioners, indicating he had received a license probably a year earlier, as most licenses expired after a year. This does not mean he was operating a full-blown tavern where people could stay and he would serve food. His operation was probably more like the one operated by Lincoln and Berry at their store in New Salem, if you're familiar with that. 3 days later, on March 11th, 1831, he received a license to retail merchandise. Now, this was the first year that required store owners, by law, store owners had to obtain a license to sell goods. Roll renewed both of these licenses on March 6, 1832, giving him another year to retail goods and liquor. He probably moved out of Sangamo Town in early 1833 when Dr. Anson G. Henry came to town. And I found this advertisement from March of 34 showing that he'd built a distillery and a mill which was now for sale. And he owned 1,000 acres, so he'd done quite well, basically, buying up farmland. It makes me wonder if the distillery and the mill were located in Sangamo Town or just nearby. We know that Roll was selling liquor at Sangamo Town, so I guess it stands to reason that he could sell his own product, an early vertical industry. By the 1830s, another store was in operation in Sangamo Town in competition with Roll. Charles Broadwell received a license to retail merchandise on 1 month after Roll. By December 1831, Broadwell was advertising, as shown here, the storehouse for lease. A man named Benjamin Dunn, who was claimed to be a merchant at Sangamo Town, could have rented the store. However, one family history I found dated his death in 1831, which would not line up unless Dunn was selling goods under Broadwell's license. Jacob Carmen's nephew, Caleb, received a license to keep a tavern in Sangamo Town in April of 1832. I don't know how long he operated the tavern there, or if he succeeded his uncle in the business, which seems plausible. Or he could have been, as Hellstone had bought the tavern site in 1831, he could have been renting it from him. Caleb later moved to New Salem, where he operated a tavern as well. He then moved to Petersburg. Caleb provided some of the information about Abraham Lincoln's activities at Sangamo Town in 1831 to William H. Herndon when he was compiling a biography of Lincoln. This man here is Dr. Anson G. Henry, who briefly lived at Sangamo Town. Henry had visited Springfield in 1829 and returned in the fall of 1832 after failing in a drug business in Louisville, Kentucky. He moved to Sangamo Town in February of 1833 in Jacob Roll's house, which seems to be about the time that Roll left Sangamo and moved to a farm. Henry was appointed postmaster there in April, and by the end of August, he was back in Springfield. Henry became a close friend of Abraham Lincoln and served as the town's physician at times. So I think what's happening here is that he's even seeing kind of the writing on the wall. Sangamo Town was starting to fail, as in the early 30s, there was, there were stores and taverns going on, but they were starting to shut down. And I think that he, as a postmaster there, probably wasn't making a lot of money, and he didn't operate a store, and maybe as a physician, he was had a practice there as well. Anson G. Henry was succeeded as postmaster by James Shepard, who was the last postmaster in Sangamo Town before the office was transferred to nearby Salisbury. Shepard did not operate a store, but was somehow connected with the flour mill in town. His name appears on several receipts from the mill as a person receiving deliveries of wheat from farmers. One announcement in the newspaper states that Shepard was adding a steam engine to the Broadwell mill. It was very confusing because there was a mill located in Sangamo Town in the mill square, as you see right there, and he was buying property around it, but there was another mill up on the river, which we'll get to. But I don't know how he was, why he was adding a steam mill. That seemed to be a great expense, and that seems to be the only, like I said, note that showed that he was actually connected, other than the receipts I mentioned before. He had come to Sangamon County as early as 1827 with his parents, but he later held positions of county assessor and superintendent of schools after he moved to Springfield in 1840. and his family might have been some of the last occupants of Sangamo Town. And because in 1834, he and his mother bought lots from Charles Broadwell, and that was kind of like the last lots that were sold to individuals. This is a copy, or just an image of a carding machine. The first known mill at Sangamo Town was the carding mill established by Brigham and Broadwell in 26. And there's an interesting story there. It says an acquaintance of Brigham's from back east came to visit Brigham when he was purchasing cattle in the area. So this guy was buying cattle and he was going to move them to, I think, up to Green Bay or up to Galena, over one of the trails. Knowing that Brigham had this carding mill and it was powered by animals, the acquaintance offered to trade a pair of blind oxen that might be useful for that purpose. Brigham agreed to trade his horse for the oxen. It was dark when the acquaintances took Brigham to see the oxen and explained that they were a little blind. Brigham then showed his horse to the acquaintance, which appeared to be a fine-looking animal. The next morning, the acquaintance learned that his new horse was blind as a bat, and probably had been that way for years. But instead of anger, the two men later laughed about the incident. After his departure, Brigham sold his interest in the carding block to an operator of the machine named Benjamin McElvain, and he basically held on to it for a while as a partner with Charles Broadwell, and then sold his interest back. And then a man named Raleigh Morgan came in, and he operated the carding mill for a time, and he said that he'd been working there since the 1824 time period. So he was probably another wool carder that knew how to do this. Because I think neither Brigham or Charles Broadwell probably actually knew how to operate the carding mill. It was more like they owned it and found somebody to do the work for them. And Morgan kept it in Sangamo Town for a while, then he took it out to his farm in 35, but then he sold it back to a firm in 1840, and the machine was moved back to the mill in Sangamo Town. So that's the end of that. So what you see at the top here, this is actually one of the receipts that we have in the Sangamon Valley showing the receipt. This one's from Robert McClellan, dated March 17th, 1840, where he's delivered 55 barrels to the firm of Allen and Blankenship, which is a Springfield firm that was probably having wheat delivered to the mill so that they could have flour, created by the mill as a way for them to earn money. As instead of having cash, a lot of people were trading crops and things like that. So this one was received by John Seaman for William Porter. And those are two important names in there. We have always known that mills were a part of the plan for the town since the beginning. As I mentioned earlier, the first mill mentioned was in 1832 in that ad for Henry and Porter's mill. And Henry and Porter, it wasn't Anson Henry, it was another James Henry, but William Porter would have been the partner as well. So William Porter was involved in the mill at Sangamo Town as early as 1832, and it was probably leased from Charles Broadwell. Porter became an agent for steam engines from a firm in Cincinnati, Ohio. And then later on, in December of 33, he actually bought the mill square from Charles Broadwell for $1,400, which makes me think that they were, the mill was there and that they was buying parts of the old animal-powered mill. Because the deed where he's buying that mill square states that he and Seaman were actually erecting their own steam mill on the square. And probably the steam engine was purchased from the Cincinnati firm that he was an agent for. On January 30th, 1834, they then put a mortgage with that firm in Cincinnati and put the mill square up as collateral. And And it said that by that time that they had erected a steam mill. And so the mill didn't actually stay very long in Sangamo Town. Porter and a couple of other new partners purchased a 4-acre tract just outside of Sangamo Town on the road to New Salem, and the equipment and the mill, the engine, were moved out of Sangamo Town to the new site. The second mill at Sangamo Town was located on the river. It was probably built in 1833 by Charles Broadwell, and he actually built it and then turned around and offered it for sale. So again, I think he was just trying to get out of the business that he didn't want to really be into, and he advertised it for sale for two or 3 years. By 34 though, he sold a 4th interest in the steam mill to Waters Carman. That's the gentleman seated there. Another one of those older photos I was talking about. Well after he was, probably just in his 20s or 30s when he took that photo, or when he was operating the mill. But anyway, this deed was a title bond, which is different from just me giving you money and then taking possession. It required Carman to make payments from 1836 to 39, and he apparently failed to do that because in 38, Broadwell sold the mill to 3 men named Beach, Ruckle, Jacob Ruckle, and Daniel Ruckle, Richard Beach, for $12,000, which seemed like a fairly good price for a land and mill. And there was some land involved in that price as well. But the mill did name it as the Broadwell and Carman Mill. The deed said that, indicating that Broadwell and Carman may have operated the sawmill and flour mill together. And they also had an ad in the paper saying they were dissolving their partnership. Carman, though, turned around and formed a partnership with the Ruckles, and it was called Carman, Ruckle and Company. And they were in operation doing flour milling, carding wool, racing, things like that. And they also had a contract with the commissioners in charge of building the new State House to furnish 60,000 sawed plaster laths to the construction of the new state capitol, new old state capitol as we would know it, for $240. And then Beach and Company, they didn't make their payments as well, so they assigned the title bond to another company called Sanford and Company, and which consisted of a man named Ira Sanford and 2 others, and they went into business. So this mill just didn't seem to have, very much success in long-term ownership, and within 8 years it had been switched over 3 times to different owners, and it ended up coming back to Charles Broadwell in 1844, when he went after the owners for non-payment, and he received the mill back and had to pay $2,400 in order to get it back in 44. And finally, in September of 46, he sold the mill for the last time to a man named Ebenezer Mattoon Jr. for just $1,200. Now, Mattoon was a brother-in-law to Ira Sanford, one of the previous owners, and it's my speculation that the mill was deassembled and taken down the river to be used as a new mill at Petersburg, because I found that Sanford appeared as a miller living in Petersburg in 1850. By the mid-1830s, basically, Sangamo Town was done, other than for the mills and some housing for the mill workers. I think competition from neighboring communities like Salisbury, New Salem, and Athens helped make that demise happen. Salisbury was created in 1832, New Salem 1829, and Athens in 1831. And so I don't know why, these people, why Sangamo Town would lose its people when, to all these new communities that were no bigger or no better than, an existing spot. But it happened. And on March 3rd, 1845, the town plat was vacated by the General Assembly. Basically, all the boundary lines were removed and everybody went back all the land went back to agricultural purposes. Charles Broadwell left soon after for Pekin, Illinois, where he died in 1854. And so that kind of concludes the end of Sangamo Town. If you want to know more about it, the Sangamo Frontier book by Robert Masdrum has a couple of chapters that has a lot of great information. Robert rediscovered Sangamo Town basically by doing archaeology for several years there and figuring out where the sites were, and you know, just from doing the archaeology, he could tell exactly where, you know, these people were living, and figuring out where the tavern was, where the store was, where other things, how much was of it occupied, and things like that. So that's dealt with in these two chapters with a lot of history in it as well. And there's also great information, if you can find it. We have it up in the Sangamon Valley, but research on the Broadwells that was put together by the Clayville Rural Life Center back when Sangamon State University got Clayville from Dr. Pearson, and they did all that research. And so if you want to know anything about the Broadwell family, they have it in there. There's like 2 volumes that just talks about their land holdings and the different tracts, because Broadwell had quite a huge family when he came up here. He brought 8 children up with a couple of them that were married and a grandchild, and he had probably 2,000 acres when he passed away in 1827, or had bought 2,000 and separated it out among his children. So, you know, the Broadwell Tavern at Clayville was one that was associated with his son, John B. So those are 2 great sources if you ever want to do more research on Sangamo Town. Thank you. Do we have any questions?
Is Sangamo Town now agricultural?
Yes.
So there's no buildings or anything we can associate
No.
with it?
No.
So if I wanted to go find it from Springfield, what would I do?
You can't. It's on private property. It's not near a county blacktop or a township blacktop. It's really inaccessible. There's no landmarks associated with it, and there's a tenant farmer nearby that keeps a shotgun in his truck.
This is from Robert Masdrum, so
Yeah,
straight from the man he would know. So.
Yeah, it's not something you can see, unfortunately, but it's also it's weird. I mean, it's just this big field and some woods. There's nothing to see there.
I understand there's nothing to see there,
Yeah.
but could you give us, is there anything that's nearby that we recognize?
No, I mean there's a farmhouse that was built in the 1860s that's kind of close to, you can't even see that from the road. No, I mean it's what I tell people, that if you want to conceptualize where this is, it's right on the river, and the closest modern town is Salisbury.
Okay.
You know, and so you can kind of just get a sense of where it is and on the landscape. But there's very little there unless you know what you're looking for to see, even from the blacktop.
And is it to the east of Salisbury?
Yeah, because it's on the river. Yeah.
Do you have any idea of what population was at any point?
I really don't. You know, about maybe 30, 40 people. And that would just be a guess, because there is an 1830 census, and of course the 30 census doesn't show you the boundaries of, you know, they're just whoever's named, but there's like probably 8 households there that are known to have had people living there at one time or another. But they're also owning farmland right next to Sangamo Town, or in the area, so that they could have been living on a farm and it would look like they're living in town. But, the sale of the lots, I didn't mention that, but there were 48 lots sold in that June sale of 24. But as soon as the county seat issue went away, you know, that promise of that, most of those people didn't pay for it. And so Broadwell got some down money maybe, but he never really got the rest of it. And so most of those lots went unsold and probably just went back to the Broadwell family's possession. And then there's other times where these early communities, seemed like even though they were only 6 miles away from town, you buy a piece of property, you'd want to get a deed for it. You go to town and register with the county clerk, county recorder. Well, a lot of that didn't happen in these smaller towns. They'd go for years. New Salem was famous for that, that it's just really hard to do a chain of title on these properties because they just kind of, there's gaps in it, and that's the same way in Sangamo Town. And so we don't know who owned what at what time, and there's not something that specifically says that. And then Robert's archaeology can say, well, maybe there was something there, because there's a footprint, there's a feature there that shows some kind of activity, whether that's a cabin or something else related to a nearby property. There's a blacksmith shop there too. We don't know who that blacksmith was, if it was Jacob Roll owned it, whether he owned it himself. And he actually built it out in the middle of the street. And Broadwell was able to get it because Broadwell said, well, it's not on your land. And so he was able to haul it away. So, and that's kind of the thing with a lot of this is that, all this takes a lot of digging around in newspapers. And the earliest newspapers for Sangamo County is 1831, so we're almost done with Sangamo Town before I can even, it'd be great if something was being covered in the 1820s newspapers saying that, here's what's going on at Sangamo Town. But information about, the Gatton Enos comes from the Presidential Library because they have the letter book there, showing what letters they were writing, and they were mostly writing the St. Louis merchants saying we're sending down this material by river, but mostly they're going by wagon. Somebody will take a wagon down there and they'll bring back a load of goods for them, just get paid to do that. And seems like they sold a lot of butter. The pork thing wasn't that lucrative to them. I think when they got the barrels down to St. Louis, they figured out that some of them weren't packed very well, and so the Army was saying, well, we're not paying you, for a faulty product. So, any other?
Were you aware that the members of the Farmingdale Presbyterian Church spent a winter in the abandoned site before they moved on to Farmingdale?
Yeah, that is something I did know. I didn't mention it here, but yeah, that is fact that there was a kind of a colony of people that started the Farmingdale area that overwintered there. And was it the fall of 33 or
33, 34 or something.
33, 34, yeah. So that just goes to show that there were cabins there that were available and nobody was using them, and they were able. Now Stone, I think, was actually involved with that group too, or maybe, I'm not for sure, but we don't know if he even lived there or not. He just bought the site. So, any other questions?
Were churches much of a draw to the population, like Mr. Cartwright in Pleasant Plains and the Mormons out west? I mean, if Athens were drawing them away, maybe they had a better minister.
Well, I don't think there was any kind of organized religion there. In that time frame, and there's no record of it, there could have been a traveling minister, a missionary may have come into the area, a circuit rider, as they called them, and that would have probably been about the most exposed that they were to religion at that time, but there wasn't anything set aside as far as any denominational church, and or if they had a union meeting. There wasn't even a school in town such that they would have used that we know of, for them to actually use that for services. So, which is kind of unique. But I don't think New Salem had a church either, did it?
Well, it was the other way around. They had a school and that building probably predated the town, but they had a school that was used for church at New Salem. There's no evidence at Sangamo that there was either.
So what was the connection between Cincinnati? And it seemed like you mentioned people
So,
were coming from Cincinnati a lot. Why would you go to Cincinnati here?
Cincinnati is kind of like the parent city for Sangamo Town in a way, because that's where Moses Broadwell was, And so he made acquaintances there, and then he went on ahead, and then Jacob Roll was known to have come into the area and seen it, and then apparently went back and probably closed up his business there. And when you look at some of the settlers in the area, a lot of them were living in that Hamilton County, Cincinnati region. Like I mentioned, the Clark family, the Dunn family, Shepherd family, Wagoner family, and some of them were related through marriage. And so before they left Cincinnati, and then of course when they got here, they all settled in that northern Gardner Township area, southern Salisbury Township. And so it's fairly common, you know, in the sense that you would write letters back and forth, and you know, some people would make it. One man named Samuel Carman, who was Jacob's brother, he came with several of his sons, but he didn't like it. He moved back to Cincinnati or wherever he came from, New York, and his sons stayed, you know, because there were several of them that persisted here. So, and then you know, they seem to have been like a New England, New York group, you know, that primarily that's what the people that were settling in that particular town, you know, whereas Springfield had upland Southerners as well as New Englanders. It was more of a mixture, but it seemed pretty much most everybody was either, you know, from New York via Ohio or straight from, you know, New York or New England. So, but they didn't stick around very long either. So, you know, Ebenezer Brigham is interesting. He went up north and became kind of like the new early settler up there in a place called Blue Mound, or in that area, and he's quite well remembered in Wisconsin, early Wisconsin history, as one of the early settlers of the area. You know? So I don't know if he made it big as a lead miner. Filio he went on to become a newspaper writer or owner in Galena. Hamilton became a lead miner as well, and so several of these people ended up in that area. Boyd and Dixon, the two men that were supposed to buy Sangamo Town, Dixon, Illinois, is named after Dixon. He bought the ferry there, and then Boyd went up into Bureau County at a place called Boyd's Grove. Again, you know, one of the early settlers in a sense. You know, people were always on the move in that time frame. It's amazing if you just can find one little piece about them. You know, usually you find them towards the end of their life when they've settled down. They're writing about, oh, this is all the stuff I did before I came here. You know, and that's how you piece away the early history of them. So.
Broadwell Village up north of Williamsville, no connection.
North of what?
North of Williamsville.
The Broadwell building? Oh, town of Broadwell?
Yeah.
I think
Route
that was
66.
probably for one of William Broadwell's children. I'm not for sure. But William Broadwell was one of Moses Broadwell's sons, and he was killed in 1824 building a barn at Sangamo Town. But his wife, Margaret Stevenson, of Stevenson's Ferry fame, was remarried to a man named Richard Latham, and she ended up at Elkhart with him.
That's close.
For a while, yeah, and I think maybe one of the children may have, you know, she took her adult children, or children with him. Now the Lathams came back to Springfield after so long, and they lived there at the corner of, the southwest corner of 6th and Monroe, is where they ended up before passing away. So, any other questions? Sure.
Well, surely all these little towns didn't have a printing press to do these newspapers.
Right.
So where are these newspapers being published?
Sure.
That we're seeing?
So mostly this came from the Sangamo Journal, which would have been a Springfield paper that started in October of 1831. Prior to that, it was a paper called the Edwardsville Spectator, and it was at Edwardsville, and it lasted till about 25. But then it moved to Springfield, and it became the Sangamo Spectator, and it lasted from 26 to 28. And so it was a guy named Hooper Warren that ran it. And then they closed it out. And then there was another paper called the Illinois Republican, but extant copies of it do not exist except for maybe one in a library in St. Louis and another one in the university, which I've tried to get copies of at one time, but that was the competing paper that didn't last very long, so.
Did they
Any
print
other?
obituaries?
Hmm?
Did they print obituaries?
Excuse me, did they put a big,
bridge?
what's that?
You had mentioned a bridge.
Sure.
That they attempted, what are the characteristics of the river right there? Is it like high banks or something that would be amenable to the building?
I mean, it's hard to say what, almost, 200 years ago, but there was like a ford there, so,
It's low. It goes.
it would have been
It's
low.
gradual from the west,
Yeah.
and then it's real
Yeah.
low on the
Yeah,
east.
Robert's saying it's gradual from the west, going into the east, and so probably we know there was a ferry there, but it's very poorly understood. I've seen references to the Sangamon ferry in the county commissioner's minutes from the 1830s, but I've never found a ferry license, because that was like one of the few licensed things that they had in early government, was you gave licensed ferries for licenses, licenses for ferries, thank you, and or taverns. And so those were the two. That was a way for the government to get some revenue. And so, and I've figured out where most of these ferries were located based on, the names of the individuals, because they were later, turned into crossings or whatever. And so, but yeah, the bridge would have been interesting, but, and in fact, the first bridge across the river would have been at Stevenson's Ferry, right there, where, close to where the 55 bridge crosses the river now. So, and that would have been about 36, 37, I think. Any other questions?
So the mills, were they, you had mentioned something about an oxen and a tree.
Yeah.
But were the mills ever driven by water since they were on the river? Similar to the
I don't
other one by
know if the
river?
one at Sangamo Town was. I think it was a
You
steam
didn't
mill
have a
for-
dam, so
Yeah.
there was a law that
Right.
you couldn't dam the Sangamon River.
Yeah, you
and
weren't
that's- New
supposed to
Salem busted
dam
that law.
the river,
Yeah.
and even though somehow New Salem got away with it.
Yeah.
And early on, and I think that was even brought up, and I
Yeah,
don't know
they
if
were sued.
They
Yeah.
were sued, and so, but the oxen-powered mills were very poorly, they were poor operations because they didn't produce a lot. It took a long time to grind corn or flour using animals, and so there's stories in the early histories about you would send your kid to go get a bag of corn ground, and he might be there for 3 days because first off, there's a line, everyone's waiting, and sometimes the kid comes back with nothing because he'd ate all the corn while he was waiting. And so,
That's why steam mill was important.
yeah, that's
So
why the steam mills.
You're on the river, but you're pumping the water up into
Yeah.
boilers.
Yeah, and partly the other thing is that the water-powered mills were seasonal as well, because you had to have, a water level up enough in order to turn, whatever kind of mill it was. There's different wheels, there's an